All right, so it is December of 2021, and I have just finished my first round of classes at CGMA, and, you know, I learned a lot, which is kind of the point. These are my study glasses that I put on when I'm studying, and I'm not studying, so I guess I'll take them off. But I wanted to hop on here and share with you my biggest takeaways of what I learned from the 3 classes that I did, which I'm gonna go and I'm gonna break up what I learned from each specific class, but before that I have like overarching like umbrella lessons, and the very first one is don't take 3 classes at CGMA. And the reason I say that is that it's a lot of work, and I had a job through pretty much most of that time. And even if you don't have a job or you're a student, or, you know, I guess being a student is a job, but like even if you think you have all the time in the world, it's a lot of work to do the homework for each class and to watch the lectures for each class / take notes and actually maximize the amount of time that you need to in order to get the most out of this class that you would want. The second piece of overarching feedback / experience is that live feedback is infinitely better than pre-recorded feedback, but that both of those are better than no feedback. The biggest benefit, I think, of going to CGMA or some, you know, paying for a lecture on Learn Squared isn't the lecture itself. Yes, that knowledge is valuable, but there's a lot of tutorials online. So yeah, it helps that the tutorial is made by an industry expert who actually knows what they're talking about, opposed to some bloke on YouTube. But really the value of going to school online is getting that feedback, of personalized feedback for yourself, of here is how you, viewer specifically, can improve with what you need to do in order for you to achieve your specific goals. 2 of my classes were individual recorded feedback where I would watch the lecture, do the homework, send it in, and they would record, you know, a 5-minute video for me specifically and tell me what it was, and that was okay. But one of the classes was group feedback, and it was a 3-hour lecture on Sunday nights, and me and whoever else wanted to show up would show up, and he would basically go through and critique all of our works individually on a Zoom call, and you could interject, you could ask questions, and it was such that since you're all students learning together, if student A got a piece of feedback, you would be immediately apparent how you could apply that piece of feedback into your own work. And it was a lot more helpful and beneficial. And yeah, it's 3 hours on a Sunday night, and it was, you know, a longer time, but 3 hours of constant feedback that's applicable to you if you're an active listener, an active learner, and trying to apply as much as you can, way more value add than a 5-minute video. Okay, now with those big lessons out of the way, the first class that I want to talk about is anatomy. The first big lesson that I learned is the 8-head model for how a human body is proportioned. So according to this, as a rough guideline, the idealized human figure is 8 heads tall. So 1 head obviously gets you to your head, 1.5 gets you to the pit of your neck, 2 gets you to your nipples, 3 gets you to your navel, 4 gets you to your crotch, and then 2 heads, 6 get you to your kneecaps, and then 8 get you down to your feet. So if you have that as a rough ballpark, it can help with proportions. The second tip is something called the kite. Now what the kite is that if you just draw a connecting line from your belly button to your nipples to the pit of your neck, you end up getting this diamond shape that can help you determine the twist and perspective of your chest. The third big takeaway I got from anatomy, and this is kind of like 2 things dropped in one, is that the trapezius is a huge landmark for your back, along with your latissimus, which is a really unique set of muscles that I didn't know that kind of wraps around and like ties into the confusion of like your obliques, like this part of your body over here, and like your back, that kind of like nothingness land, at least for me, that's what it was. Latissimus helped kind of cover that, you know, gap of knowledge for me. And then the last big takeaway I got from anatomy is that there's a lot of value in traditional art master paintings to be used as reference. It was really interesting. The professor didn't allow you to use people as reference for anatomy. You had to use old art master paintings. And at first I was a little confused by this, but it kind of made sense the more as the weeks went on, because these old paint masters had to identify and show these muscles under the skin. It's one thing if you have, you know, like a deconstructed, like, here's the muscles of your arm, but then as soon as you put skin on top of it, unless they're like jacked, it can be kind of hard to see what's what. So seeing the masters kind of show what's what underneath the skin in a way that made sense anatomically was helpful to see. All right, so the second class I was in was all about facial features and drawing the face and expressions. The first big takeaway is that I have a tendency to make my chins too small. The end result of this is that my faces would look childlike and kind of chibi and cute by default, and I didn't really know that I was doing that. I think it's probably because I was studying a lot of like cute, smaller, you know, like chibi-ish anime looking girls and figures. So that probably kind of slipped in there somehow, so I had to make my chins bigger. The second big takeaway is I have a tendency to exaggerate the distance between my nose and my lip. That can be seen pretty clearly in this example here, and I didn't even know that I was doing it, but apparently I do. Another subconscious little tick for me to keep in mind. And this isn't something like, you need to change this to be a better artist. It's like, keep in mind that you have a tendency to do this, and if it's not looking the way that you want, maybe try tweaking that. Which leads to my next big takeaway, was that an artist's skill is determined, at least for stylized works, in what you can omit from a painting. And I really struggled to know what to omit and what not to include. So you can see in these pictures here, I included pretty much every wrinkle that I could see, and it's not flattering, really, at all. And, you know, how do you capture the likeness without showing all of the wrinkles and all of the, you know, muscles and stuff that you see on the face? Still figuring that out, not entirely sure, but that's where the skill comes in. That's where the knowledge comes in of knowing how to simplify things. And the last most helpful takeaway was learning the official proportions of the face, meaning that your hairline to your eyebrows to the base of your nose, not the tip, but the base of your nose to your chin, should all be roughly equal. And that is the base that you can then extrapolate out from and make it more stylized if you want. But again, from your forehead to your eyebrows, the bottom of your lip to your chin should be the same to start. And then my last class was about figure drawing and the anatomy of style, and I've already gushed a bit about this professor, Patrick Jones. He's amazing. This was my favorite class. This was the one with the 3 hours on Sunday. And I learned, like, if I had to pay the same amount of money for the cost of 3 classes, I would have paid it for just this one class. And spoiler alert, I learned so much from him specifically in his class that I'm taking his class again and repeating it next semester, so in the winter. So I'm gonna take this class twice because it helped me so much. Again, I already touched on this in another video, so I'll go over it kind of quickly. Number 1 tip, if you are experiencing problems within the first 5 minutes of your piece, start over. The thought for this, he told me, is that most of the errors occur within the first 5 minutes of your piece. So if you're struggling after you start, just make a mental note of where you're struggling and then literally just start over and don't be precious with it. And do that enough times, eventually you'll kind of get some traction, you'll get some iterations, and you'll just end up creating and going from a starting point that you maybe not have even planned. Which leads to my next point. Don't sit down planning to make a masterpiece. This one helped me a lot because I get stuck in my head pretty much all the time. And this piece of advice stems from, if you sit down trying and expecting to make a masterpiece, you probably won't, because that pressure is going to kill you. Instead, sit down thinking that you're going to enjoy art and have fun and practice, and eventually, one day, without you really planning, you're going to sit down and make something that surprises you. And that happened to me. When I sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to make a portrait and it's going to be great, and I'm going to post it to Twitter, and I'm going to color it and it's going to be amazing, it turned out like this. And it's awful, and I hated it, and I still hate it, and it's embarrassing, and I was like, well, I guess I suck at everything. Versus, I wasn't even planning on doing this homework assignment in my anatomy class. I was going to skip the hands assignment because I was so underconfident in drawing hands, and then I busted out these hands that I'm still to this day kind of surprised that I drew. Like, they look uncharacteristically good. The third piece of advice is to draw on paper, which I never thought I would say, because I started art doing concept art, photo bashing, kit bashing, Blender, like 3D, like very far away from even the concept of drawing. Like, I was in environments in 3D land when I started this 3 years ago. And the reason for that is that it forces you to actually feel like there's no abstraction. Like, I have a Wacom tablet here where you draw on this and then you look at the screen, right? So I don't have a Cintiq. But even if I had a Cintiq and I was drawing on the screen directly, there's still the abstraction of drawing digitally, as opposed to it's completely real when you're drawing and you have total control over pen pressure, and, you know, ultimately you have a limited amount of revisions you can do unless you slaughter your page using the eraser. So it forces you to think more, at least for me it did. And it helped take that pressure off because it was just in a sketchbook. And it was a good foundation for me to get out of my head before I even had to think about, you know, blending modes or opacity or pen pressure or Photoshop. And it just let me actually focus on drawing itself. Okay, and now an actual figure drawing tip. Obviously, gesture is the most important. I feel like that's pretty common. People kind of already know that. But gesture is the most important. And if you just focus on the gesture, I was getting hung up on proportions one week. And I told him, he asked me, I was like, I'm really stressed about proportions. I feel like I kind of sort of get the gesture, and then my legs are way off, or my arms are way off, or, you know, the hips don't work. And he literally told me, proportions be damned. Just focus on the gesture, and with repetition, you'll figure out the proportions as they come up. So then I started to do that, but then my problem was, okay, I kind of sort of get this like stick figure gesture. What about form? Like, I kind of need to like, what's the next step from there? And he said, for me specifically, because I was like one of the worst people in the class, which kind of sucked, but he was like, after you get the gesture, you think that you're content with it, slap on cylinders for the appendages, for the torso, for the what have you, and draw your, your ellipses, your contouring the form in your mind. And then lastly, for figure drawing, focus on rhythm. And that can sound like an artsy-fartsy, like abstract term, and it kind of was to me. But the way that he explained it is that once you have your center line, once you have the gesture line, like the main like oomph of whatever gesture you're drawing, as you continue to round it out, go on alternating signs of the line. So if your line, if your center line is this, like draw one shoulder on this side, then draw the shoulder on this side. It's the same principle of drawing both eyes at the same time. So you know how people complain about not being able to draw the other eye? It's the same thing as start with the left eye, then start with the right eye, then continue with the left eye, then continue with the right eye, and you keep going back and forth. That's like rhythm. And you continue that throughout your entire piece from head to toe, working your way up to the point where he's so convinced that rhythm works, and he's obviously a professional, so why would I like doubt that at the beginning stages he doesn't even take his pen off, or his brush, he uses charcoal, he doesn't take his pencil off the paper until well into the piece, and he just keeps going really lightly and just focusing and make a priority on rhythm and gesture. And then his stuff looks amazing. Like, his stuff looks like this. So I'm like, oh, it works for me. What do I know? Sure, I'll do that. So there you have it. I'm going to flash up all the words on the screen at the same time of all the big takeaways. Here they are. Here's my takeaways for everything I talked about in this video for my first quarter at CGMA. I learned a lot. I really recommend it. It really helps to have that feedback. So going forward, classes start in January of 2022. I am taking a sketching class, which I'm really excited for. So more just drawing, more just sketching in general. I'm hoping I'll get a lot better and more comfortable at form and perspective, because I feel like I really lack in those two areas. And then again, taking my man, Patrick Jones, taking his course again and continuing to work on the figure. That's it for this video. Hope my lessons that I got from me could help you on your journey, and let's keep learning and getting better art together. See you next time.